Welcome to the Drum Channel. This is one of these moments where, talk about peak experiences where your dreams come true. It's like been a dream of mine to get my favorite Zappa drummers together and have us all just talk about our experience, which was such a seminal experience for all of us. And so I'm sitting here with the unbelievable Ruth Underwood,
Yay.
Chad Wakerman,
Yeah, right.
my good buddy, Chester Tompson,
Yes.
and Ralph Humphrey.
Yes. Right.
And I'm just going to start by saying, Chad and Chad knows how much I love him, and we play together all the time, and he's just a consummate musician. And, I always say he's one of the most underrated drummers because it seems like Zappa changed the dynamics of the group, and there was more personality development, and say Vinny and I were able to be, get more well known. Mm-hmm. Whereas by the time Chad got in, it really was sort of a faceless band. He kind of kept it that way. They were in the back, and he was up front, and it was all pretty much about Frank, which is cool. But I always felt that Chad is so underrated that way in terms of his persona.
No,
now,
that's right.
Personally, I would not rather play with anybody in the world because when we play duets together, he's the most empathetic, sensitive player. Makes me sound right when I'm wrong, and you just can't put a price tag on guys like that who have those kinds of ears and sensitivity and musicality. So I love him. Now, end of that disclaimer.
I love him too. And
and he loves me too.
Both
Should you hug me?
But no, because
we've done tours together.
The thrust I want to get to here is you three, I think, were in Zappa's band where it was really setting a bar that had never been set. I auditioned, I got an audition, 3 days before I decided to buy Apostrophe and Live at the Roxy with all of you on it, and it literally scared me sleepless. I could, I had no idea what Frank's music was about, and that certainly opened my eyes. And I thought, my God, this music is difficult, it's challenging, it's complex, sort of like Mahavishnu. It's got fusion elements, it's got rock elements, it's humorous. The players are stellar. The sheer volume of memorization would scare anybody. And then you had the quality of players. Like when you guys were exchanging furious drum solos back and forth on whatever tune that was, I sat there and I just said, what could I possibly have to offer this guy? and you know, just like it was a real growth experience, eye-opener. And then Ruth, of course, is just, you know, the consummate percussionist and just so important to us all. When we got to play, I was a semi-veteran. I think I'd been in the band 1 or 2 years, and then we got to play together, and we had learned the Black Page by then, and we, you know, being normal drummers, we found cheap versions of how to do some of these complex rhythms that sounded almost precise, but they were a little easier for us to relate to. And so, you know, we had it pretty much down that way, and Ruth, one take, and she's just like, hold it. This septuplet is more like this, and I mean, she just fine-tuned everything to perfection. And I was just, you know, ears, Juilliard, everything, you know, I was so honored to be there. Plus, we were great friends and had so much fun. And so I just want to say, I think I never felt Frank, with any of my contributions, reach the level that, you know, he had with you guys. It was so inspiring. And Duke and Napoleon and everybody, that group. This record, One Size Fits All, was the one he played me after my audition that night, and just scared me to death. Well, I thought it was the best stuff he had ever written. Beautiful, sounded so great. So that's where, you know, I come in, and that's where I'm going to shut up. And I just want to have all of us sit here and just think about what Frank meant to us, and you know, what we have done as drummers. You know, literally just open it up so everybody can be a fly on the wall. Ralph, let's begin with you, buddy. You were in Don Ellis and Killin' Odd Times.
I saw you in Don.
Yeah.
Saw you play with Don Ellis.
Well, that was a great growing experience. Again, scared to death to audition for that band. I was going to college and felt pretty darn green. And Don calls me up. This is after he'd come to my college, San Jose State, and did a concert with Steve Bohannon. Remember Steve?
Yeah.
Fantastic drummer. Died, unfortunately, in a car crash. But I got a chance to watch Steve play and a chance to rehearse on second drums with the band. Played the concert with Don. 6 months later, he calls me up, out of the blue. Says, I'm looking for a drummer. I'm living in the Bay Area, and I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a minute. L.A. must be filled with great drummers. And he's calling me in San Jose. I felt honored, scared to death. Didn't know if I was able to cut something like this. But I went down, and I auditioned with the band. The audition was in a packed club on Lancashire Boulevard called Ellis Island. That was my audition, playing with the band in front of a packed audience. I mean, you know, nothing like being put on the spot.
Yeah, see, this is why, you know, this is the kind of stuff that you used to have to do as a musician.
Yes.
That, you know, kids today just have no clue.
Well,
and, you know,
go ahead. You don't know what
I
you're
mean,
made of until you're actually called upon to, like, produce. And so I pulled up, I don't know what, but it seemed to make it. He took me to his office after the gig and offered me the gig, and I couldn't believe it. And so a month later, I was living in Los Angeles, and this would have been 1968. So for 5 on and off years, I played with that band, and that was just a great experience. Went all over the world and played a lot of odd meters.
Yeah.
And so as far as me getting that together, no problem. So come 1973, and Frank's looking for a drummer. I don't know this. I don't know that he's also seen 40, 50 drummers. And George Duke, an old friend, calls me and said, you know, Frank is looking for a drummer, and I think you should come down. And I'm thinking, wow, I don't even know his music. I don't know what it's all about. But I thought, well, I'll go and do it, not knowing what was going to happen. And went down, and Ruth, maybe you can refresh my memory. I think what I had to play, which was about 45 minutes of music, was he just kept throwing stuff at me, you know, like this chart, that chart, let's jam in some odd meters. Maybe there was the bebop tango that we had to read, something like that. Something as hard.
I got to tell you, Ralph, I don't remember that day at all.
Well, okay.
I actually don't.
Well, it was a
just
blur
seems
to me too.
All of a sudden, there you were, and it was perfect. And I don't remember the whole process. But I do remember when Chester auditioned, but I know we're not on that subject yet.
Yeah.
That I remember for some reason.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, I mean, I guess, 45, 50 minutes. We played. Frank stopped, took me aside, said, "You want to join the band?" So I was like, "Okay, here we go." And so that was my experience getting in the band. And then, of course, for a year and a half, 2 years, had a chance to record, tour, get to know some great people. At that time, Ian Underwood was in the band.
Right.
Jean-Luc Ponty was in the band.
Yeah.
George Duke, of course.
Bruce Fowler.
Bruce
Bruce.
Fowler, Tom Fowler.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there was anybody else. Sal Marquez.
Oh, right.
Sal was
Not
the
a
singer.
Not a slouch on trumpet.
No,
either.
not a slouch on trumpet. He was the singer. That's right, and did a nice job.
Yeah.
Crazy as Sal is, sorry Sal, but you are crazy. But I love you anyhow. But yeah, and you know, that of course that was the one drummer days with Frank, and then I remember, I forget how long we were, 9 months, whatever, and then Frank always liked to reorganize the band. He was always into changing things up, changing the material, and changing the personnel. So suddenly there's Napoleon, Murphy Brock, and Chester, and did Jeff Simmons come in at that time too?
No, he came later.
He came a little later?
Yeah.
But he had also been in the band
but he
way
had-
before us.
That's right. He had been in the band before.
Yeah.
And so, Sal went away, and the lineup changed. Now there were 9 of us, I believe. 2 drum sets. And my Pearl drum set went away.
Yeah.
And Frank got us 2 Octopus Ludwig
That's
drum
it.
Yes.
sets.
That's the one I auditioned on this record, man.
right?
And so here
yeah.
we are, 2 drummers, you know, with these massive drum sets. And what are we going to do, you know? And
Listen to that.
maybe
They'll
this is
find
where,
out.
you know, we should let Chester tell us about his audition.
Well, Chester and I talked about that too, so we already have that. We can
All right.
slice that in. But yeah,
Right.
let's get into it.
Actually, I've got a question for you, Chester. I'm trying to remember when the Mahavishnu Orchestra opened for Frank. Were you in the band yet?
No.
Okay, then that totally clicks with what I wanted to say, but I didn't want to say something incorrect, which was a very vivid memory that I have of going on a particular tour where Mahavishnu, as I just said, opened for Frank
Opened
Zappa.
for Frank.
And I got to tell you, I distinctly remember walking into this gigantic hall and actually physically feeling almost like that television commercial for the speakers, being blown back. I never had experienced a force of volume and Billy Cobham, hello,
Get it.
just bam, you know, just all over the place. And I took one look at Frank, and I'm telling you, his face changed.
Yeah.
And I actually thought to myself, something major is going to be happening. And sure enough, it was you. And Nappy and new music and new everything.
Yeah.
I actually think, I could be dead wrong, but I actually think that Frank started to feel this symphony orchestra, college-educated, very perfect, meticulous sounding machine that I've got here is all well and good, but I want to blow those people out of their chairs too. And like I say, I could be wrong, but suddenly there was change in the wind, and it was
Amen.
different.
Well, Frank was a drummer. He started with a drummer. I have
Right.
A lot of people don't know that.
somewhere I
Yeah.
have the 8x12 Xerox copy of him playing with the Antelope Valley Stage Band.
Do you
know,
really?
With all
Wow.
the little bandstand things. Yeah.
man.
So we'll fly that in
You got to
here.
make copies.
Oh, yeah.
But,
Yeah.
you know, how could anyone like Frank not see anybody who can play the drums and go, I know this guy's on fire or
Yeah.
doing something, you know. So I'm sure that had a big impact on him, as much as he
Yes.
probably wouldn't
Well, Terry,
admit that,
even-
because he always used to, you know, when I would play too busy on a certain night, he'd always say, you sound like you're auditioning for the Mahavishnu Orchestra, Bozzio.
Right, right,
Lay
right,
back, you know, keep the time, keep playing
Yes.
so many fills, you know.
And
He was
Wow.
right, though. He was right. I was young and you know,
Yeah.
needed to prove myself. And that's one of my main regrets is that I couldn't, you know, play with him now with the sensibilities I have to be a little more musical.
You know, I have that exact same feeling inside myself as well. Not about you, about me.
I
But I wanted to say the other thing about Mahavishnu Orchestra that was sort of was rubbing salt in the wound was the presence of Jerry Goodman on violin. So you have Jean-Luc and Jerry Goodman.
Yeah.
So you know, we could no longer be unique. Here's this other machine up on stage
Yeah.
with the same instrumentation, at least, you know.
Somebody else told me too that this was kind of like a clash of the titans, and that
Yeah.
both McLaughlin and Zappa would be cranked in their dressing rooms, just noting
Yeah,
out,
yeah.
warming up for their respective shows. And I'm sure Jean-Luc was a little bit frightened.
Yes.
And Jerry as well. I mean, you know,
And also, John McLaughlin was extremely charismatic. I mean,
Yeah.
personally,
Yeah.
aside from his incredible music history and everything that he's gone on to do since then, he, you know, he. I don't know if you guys remember. Well, you weren't there, but he dressed in all white.
Yeah. It was-
Sometimes would be barefoot. Always looked like he was in a different dimension, above it all. You know, knowing things no one else could know. And there was a real force to that. And so Frank was no longer the only charismatic person in the room,
Yeah.
so to speak.
yeah.
I remember the first concert with them.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
the
yeah.
first time I had seen Billy Cobham live, I had
Oh,
been
yeah.
listening to him.
And what pressure on you.
Well, there they
Forget
are opening
about
for Frank, and you're right. What pressure!
Yeah.
How could you not help but, be totally blown away with what power
That's right.
you were seeing and hearing? And then, like you said, the band, the volume and
Yep.
the energy was
Yep.
just extraordinary. And they played a zillion notes,
Yes.
blazing fast and clean as a whistle.
Yeah.
And
You
Jan
know?
Hammer. I mean, God,
Oh,
that
all
guy's
of them.
One of my
Every
favorite
one of them.
drummers.
Well,
yeah.
let
well,
alone
thank
his
God for
keyboard
Rick
playing,
Laird.
you know?
He was the center post in the band. He was the one that didn't venture out
That's
because
right.
everybody else did.
Yep.
And so Rick was the center post.
Right.
But I mean, watching that, standing backstage, as close as I am to you, watching
Yeah.
Billy and going, now what am I going to do when I walk on stage?
Yes.
And I thought, I'm going to play Frank's music. What else can I do?
I guess it was 73. I looked up from something we were playing. We were playing quickly, but we just knew it automatically. And it might have been, you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Mercy Doing.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
I can never remember that.
I can never remember the
And I-
titles, but I know the
and
lyrics.
I saw something sort of peripherally, and as I was playing, you were there in my frame of reference, but something was over there, and it was Billy Cobham clocking us. And I went, yeah. Really, he was amazed.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely amazed. And I
Oh,
went,
yeah.
okay, it works both ways.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
we,
it's
we,
all right.
we
Yeah.
struck up a great friendship after that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it was fantastic.
Yeah, and
he's
that
a huge
once again,
Zappa fan.
yeah,
I
and
think
there's
that
Billy
that
still is.
drummer thing. Plus, he's a consummate artist and musician, and can
Right.
recognize, even though something's different, what's good and what's not. I remember seeing him, thinking, "Oh man, there's just no way I can do this." And that's probably one of the little things that makes you go, "Okay, later on in my life, when I get proficient enough, I'm going to have to just really find my own way that isn't that, because it doesn't matter if I practice 10 hours a day for 10 years, I'm not going to be able to do that. That
Right.
guy is superhuman, and
And that's great.
yeah, and that's
That
great.
Everyone is unique. That's a
Everyone is
beautiful
unique.
thing.
Exactly,
But
exactly.
I think that's part of the rite of passage, because the night before my second gig with the band was at the Chicago Auditorium Theater. We all went down and saw my Havishness
That's right.
that
Oh,
night,
yeah.
which I'd heard recordings, but same thing again. We're standing on the side of the stage. I couldn't watch the whole thing. I had to keep leaving and coming back because the intensity was like,
Yeah.
it almost hurt,
Yeah, that's
Overwhelming.
And I
right.
walk with,
Yep.
and I had no clue about this stuff. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, got this puzzled look, and Ralph would go, "That's 7,
Yeah.
that's 9, that's 11," and say, "What do you mean?" And he'd count it out for me. Okay, got it.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, and I remember distinctly feeling. There've been a couple of moments in my life where something's really changed my whole concept of drums, and that was one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I had never seen anybody hit a drum that hard in my life.
Yes.
I was expecting the floor toms to jump up in the air.
But it's not just hard.
No,
there was
it
a sort
musical.
of roundness
it
to
was
it.
Power. It was, yeah.
And a grace to it, a gracefulness.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just bashing away
So
with
here,
tons of
here I am, like
strength.
scared to death. It's like second gig, and then I've got to see this on top of it.
Right,
It's
right.
like- so I can really relate to that feeling. It's like, okay, I'm just gonna
Yeah.
try to play the show. That's all I
Yeah,
can
that's
do.
all you can
Yeah.
do.
Fortunately, I had a night after wasn't like the same night. I can't even imagine that, dealing with that the same night.
Yeah, the same. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, that's where you got to go. Kudos, man. The quartet with Stu Goldberg and Ralph on bass. I forget his name, from Detroit.
Ralph
Spacing on his
Armstrong?
name. Ralph
Yeah,
Armstrong,
Ralph
thanks.
Armstrong.
And Narada opened up for Frank in Waterbury, Connecticut. And I knew Narada. I think I'd met him once before, and he's like such a loving, wonderful cat and stuff, which just doesn't make you feel any better, any less scared, And he's a hero, and I got to go on there after him. And man, it's just so hard, and I think those things are, paying your dues, because then you start to realize, I don't have to be somebody else, but that you can't do that then. And there really was that thing then, I mean, that was highly evident. It was highly competitive. And, for me, that's why, like, when I came in, you guys had encompassed that, which was also Mahavishnu, Miles, Weather Report, Chick Corea, all those bands were what I thought the best music was. And, here I am, after you had encompassed that and were feeding it back to me. And I'm going, because I never heard it, but I had heard Mahavishnu and all this stuff. And I'm going, what can I possibly offer? This band was very, very special, really incredible. All of you just were, the ultimate, and that
Completely
music
inspiring.
too. What?
Yeah, completely inspiring. I mean,
Yeah,
I would
absolutely
get to record
inspiring.
at Frank's house, and he would, in between an hour or so of recording, you just sit me down and put some video on, some footage of previous bands, and I would just be,
Yeah. And those listening
Completely blown
experiences were
away.
always fun up there with him. He'd just sit down and listen to records all night and, play me obscure blues things I've never heard. The Bulgarian chick singers I heard before anybody ever heard of them. He had a record, and check out this picture. Look at that chick, and she was just this proud mountain, ethnic woman from Bulgaria. And she had a voice that, would cut through mountain valleys, and it was just amazing stuff. And the Jean-Luc Ponty, with you guys playing on low-budget music for a low-budget symphony orchestra, I think is one of my favorite pieces that Frank wrote.
Yep.
And I can remember, listening to that stuff up there, those big speakers, and just being so entrenched in the music. And he, that's the thing where today, music, it's very difficult to give a person that kind of experience. Directors are talking about it now with iMovies on a 2-inch screen, You can't get a theater experience and get the same effect. And we all listen to music while we're driving, while we're doing other activities, with car noises and other things, interference happening. And to go there was like a church, and you were in the sanctuary and you had the best gear money could buy, pumping out incredible music at really high quality. And you just were totally immersed in it. These kinds of listening experiences, were key to my whole experience, just, yeah. And then Ruth, how did you get in the band?
Well,
What was your audition like?
I actually we hadn't finished with how you got in, Chester, what that experience was like. Had we finished?
no, we had.
No, we hadn't even
We
started.
need to find this out.
Yeah, go ahead, Chester, tell him.
Well, we kind of talked about some of it earlier. Well, I mean, like I say, the call I got, and I mentioned to Terry earlier, I got a call from Marty, who I'd known in Baltimore. And, and the irony of it, I mean, okay, out of high school, I went on the road for 5 years playing cover bands and just, just anxious to get on the road. I'd heard too many stories. So at the end of that, I decided, all right, I'm going to college, because which I did. I went and completed like 2 years at a community college, and I was going to transfer and go to University of Maryland. I was playing 4 and 5 nights a week and paying all my own expenses, so I was killing myself. I didn't know that. I always took like 20 credits, not knowing that you didn't have to do that, So I decided, okay, I'm taking off a semester to work. Got to save some money so that, because the campus is a little farther away, I'm not going to be able to do the gigs as much. I got to have some money. So in the middle of all of that, I had applied for, which a lot of musicians in Baltimore did, to drive a school bus. I've taken the test, and I'm pretty good at driving that thing, man. And the funny part is that Sunday, the Friday before I got the call like, I guess Friday night or something. That Friday I had gone out, I'd gotten my license, the new license. They'd driven around, drove the school bus out. The guy, took me to a part of town I'd never ever been in before. Had no idea where I was. and I'm just thinking I'm just getting driving practice, and then he goes, well, this is your route. I don't even know how we got here. What do you mean this is my route, And then the other thing that was supposed to happen that Sunday, I was supposed to get my degree from my little community college thing. And my mom was so proud. None of her kids had ever gone to college, And she was just so happy about this. And then, but it's like the call comes, it's like, well, if you want the gig, you got to be out here on Sunday. Okay, so a couple of things happened. One, I said to my mom, she was so brokenhearted. I said, okay, here's the deal, Mom. I'm not going to walk on stage and get a degree, but let's call this trip to the airport my graduation, because I'm going to try everything to get this gig. I'm going to try not to have to come back without it, And she says, okay. And the other thing is, Monday morning, I don't know how those kids got to school because I never showed up. But anyway, I get out there, like I say, I get out there the night before the rehearsal. He gives me he asked, could I read? I said, well, yeah. So he gives me a chart of Kung Fu, which totally changed my opinion on whether I could read or not.
Do you know that tune?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, remember what happened to the tapes?
No.
Oh, we cut it at Bollock Sound, remember?
I remember that, yeah.
Well, the next night we came back, and the tapes weren't there.
That's
And
right.
I couldn't tell him what happened to the tapes. None of Ike's people knew what happened to the tape. Or more than likely, they heard it, didn't know what it was, and probably recorded over it.
Yeah.
That's what he thinks
That was
happened.
super
This is
ultra
Ike
complicated
Turner of
music.
Ike Turner.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I get out there. So the next day I come in. My audition was totally simple. I don't even know if you were there the first day because it was George and Tom. I was just playing grooves. My audition, I literally jammed with Frank. We played about an hour, at least an hour straight, a little over. At the end of it, he says, by the way, you got the gig. And we just jammed. I mean, he wasn't interested in anything else but the feel. So we just morphed from style to style. We played reggae, we played rock, we played blues, we played, did some shuffles. I mean, everything. And first song was like Cheapness. And I mentioned to him that when he counted the tune off, I almost got fired because I was laughing when the song started because I'd never seen lyrics like that before. I came from the hood, man. We don't talk about eating hot dogs.
Right.
And so we worked on that the rest of the day and worked on something else real straight ahead, like one of his blues things or, Reagan, such a dickie, that thing. Anyway.
Right.
So, 2 days of that. And then the third day I was there, Nappy and I both, we come in and the whole band is there. I have never been so scared in my life. You guys scared the pants off me, man.
But we were so sweet and nice.
Oh, absolutely.
It doesn't help.
seriously.
It really doesn't help. It really doesn't
then you
help.
can't
I
resent
had
you
never
guys
heard-
and blame it
I
on
had never
that.
heard anything that tight.
Wow.
I had never heard music that tight and that difficult in my entire life. I mean, I just sat there, Nappy and I, we were just kind of in the same boat. We just kind of looked at each other like, uh-oh, And I just did not sleep mostly, that first month, man. Oh, goodness, I hardly slept.
Yeah.
And, it's so funny. I watch talk shows and I get really annoyed when people just kind of like, oh, you're the greatest. Well, no, you're the greatest. But I got to tell you, Apostrophe and Overnight Sensation are two of the most well-played drum parts I've ever heard in my life on those two albums, man.
What did I just tell you, Ralph? Didn't I
mean,
say the same thing?
And
Really?
It was the same thing. It's like, what do I have? Okay, I mean, I guess I can get funky. I guess he likes it, and I'm glad,
Yeah.
And I mean, I had to learn the book, and I'm so grateful for Ralph because it's like, I mean, I never felt resentment. I just felt like, okay, well, we're here. Here's, and he just, little things, he would just help me along the way, and it just, helped to tighten it up. And it was like, man, it was scary.
Yeah.
I mean, I can
Plus-
totally relate to what you're saying.
Yeah,
man. It
those
was-
solos on there, Ralph. I mean, I had to ask who was who because I didn't know, and there was a section in there, like
Echidna Zarf?
no on the section of it's one of
Don't
these
you ever
pieces
watch
where
that
they-
thing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where they're
Always connect with the
switching.
I know,
yeah,
they go
play them
together.
they're just going off different solos.
Yes,
Right,
yes.
right.
Yeah,
So-
well,
This one section, coming from the Little Gretsch jazz kit and not having double bass and stuff, all my heroes like Tony, Eric Gravatt could do it. Just had that 1 foot roll, just that,
Yeah.
with 1 foot, and you just go, and melt, right? And he's got that
Ralph
with a
has it,
big
yeah.
ass 22-inch bass drum, muffled and stuff with a pillow, and I'm like, oh man,
Yeah.
that's one of those things that's just okay. Cut your wrist or cut your ankle if that's more important. And I have to say, that was really impressive.
3 drummers and a percussionist with Don's band. So I had been used to that, and there had been a couple of different people that I had played with the band, and it's a challenge. I mean, you must know that it's not the easiest thing in the world, and hopefully you have, people who can come together and kind of put the egos in the pocket and make it happen.
Yeah.
And I mean, Chester can say all he wants about what he learned from me, but he has no idea what I learned from him.
Right.
In terms of understanding the kind of feel that you get, and I could see where Frank was looking to get a different pocket with the band. And like Ruth said, the clean notes and the the college educated kind of
Yeah.
thing that Frank was presenting, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
But now we're going to add a little grease to the pot, and
Yeah, but
and I think you and Napoleon really did
But
do
what turned
that.
out- but what was so incredible was that you ended up learning how to do that too. So you sounded, I mean, you were totally overcompetent to play anything that we ever played. You very quickly learned everything that we knew. That's the thing that totally amazed me, because I wasn't expecting that. In fact, Chester, let me just tell you the first time I ever laid eyes on you, because this I can't get out of my mind, and it really is an endearing image I have of you that every time I think of, it makes me smile, which is you walked in that slow walk, you walked into the rehearsal hall, just the way I saw you earlier today. I knew it was you before I even looked at your face when I was coming in from the wind and didn't know where I was coming to this place. And you had 2 drumsticks in your back pocket. And when you walked, the drumsticks kind of went like that. Oh my God. And I was thinking, I was already on stage or on the little platform where we rehearsed, and Ralph had a battery of sticks and all his stuff, and I had my conservatory, display of every possible kind of drumstick, mallet, timpani mallet, whatever, right? Because you got to have that for this, and you got to have that. It really matters. And this guy walks in, 1 pair of sticks, and sits down, and it's not in a leather bag or anything fancy or hoity-toity. Right, exactly. And you walked in and you sat at this very small, I just thought of it as a very condensed drum set, and you just blasted me. I mean, it was fantastic, really fantastic. So that's the image of you that I have.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did we tour? We didn't tour with your set and my set, or did we?
Yeah.
We did.
First tour.
First tour,
Yeah, 'cause
yeah.
I wouldn't let the guys break my drums down because I didn't know anything about roadies.
Right. Don't touch my drums.
Yeah, we'd get after the set. So after about 3 or 4 nights of finishing the show, I was like,
Yeah,
you can
oh
pack
yeah.
them. You can pack them. The first few gigs, man, it's like, well, I had one of those old fiber hardware cases with a snare drum fit in and then the little
Yeah.
tray on the
Case, yeah.
top.
Yeah.
And I knew they fit a certain way, and I was scared that if they didn't put them in the right way, what did I mean? I had no clue. I mean, just absolutely no clue.
But Chester, at a time when everyone was going into the super expanded drum sets with 1,000 cymbals, and this was real power and the smoke machine, I used to think you with your little kit could just make more noise that felt right to me than all that other equipment. That was so bogus. That was just crapola compared to what you could do.
Amazing.
Yeah. Then Frank came in. I guess we just walked in one day, and there were these 2 massive drum
Yeah.
sets
Yeah.
sitting
Yeah.
there.
He had
Matching
obviously
octopus
gone to
kits.
Manny's,
That was
dropped his credit card, right, and said, play this. Yeah.
Oh, that
Frank
was-
wanted to
that
take
was
it to a new
amazing,
level.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, Chester and I right away said, okay, we got to deal with this, right? So the first thing we did was we decided to tune the drum sets about a third apart. So Chester's was higher than mine by about a third. So at least we had a sound that would first of all blend, and then you could tell who was playing what and when, and then it was working out the parts. Sometimes Frank would tell us what to do. Sometimes we'd just work it out. I had a set of cowbells. I think you had a set of
Yeah, we
cowbells
both
too,
had-
right?
Yeah, like the little cluster thing.
Yeah, I mean that was a main feature of the drum set was the cowbells.
Was it difficult getting used to playing with each other like that?
It was for me at first because
It was
I'd
was
never
for
done
me.
it before.
It was for me
Yeah.
too. Mainly because of the different places we were coming from.
Yeah.
I think that was it. But
And
the
you
thing is that again, I'm telling Chester, I learned how to get more into where his space was. As far as groove is concerned, because I was a college kid.
Yep.
You know, totally academic and learn, you know,
Yes.
big band and a lot of jazz and bebop and all that sort of thing. And yeah, Don Ellis was an interesting,
Hip. Very
you know,
hip.
thing, but
Yeah.
you know, the joke with Don was, you know, that it's a band that can't swing, you know, because we played nothing but odd meters. The band can't play in 4/4.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Wow.
No,
we
it's
actually did
swung.
try to play in 4/4 occasionally. But I mean, you know, so I can recall many times in my career where there's been a new learning experience occurring because of the situation I was finding myself in.
Right.
And this was one of them.
You know, man, and I have to congratulate you both on this because it's taken me back sitting here thinking about this, and I've since played with so many other drummers and truly enjoy it with this different older headspace. But going back to that mind space at that time, I'm thinking, who else did this? The Grateful Dead or the Doobie Brothers? So you had to literally be stoned to want to play
Was it
with
the Allman
another
Brothers?
drummer at
Yeah.
that time.
Right.
It was
Allman
just-
Brothers?
Yeah, Allman Brothers, right. It just was not
Wasn't a lot.
done.
I've seen James Brown with as many as 3 drummers playing
Yeah.
together, but you know.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
that was.
but that's almost for show, right?
But now it's so interesting, the threads though. We were talking, you know, before we came out here about how things happened, that whole amazing thing. Funny enough, I hadn't never played, well, before I ended up coming out to LA, you know, for that, I had spent like all of the last semester playing in a lab band that Hank Levy ran at Tompson
Oh, yeah.
State
Oh, really?
University.
Sure.
So I was actually familiar with some of the tunes that actually ended up in the Ellis
In Don's
book and
band,
stuff.
that's
yeah,
right.
and played some of those tunes, I guess the stuff that he had written. So I guess, and that was all in preparation for coming out, which at the time you don't know.
You don't know that. That's
but
right.
I didn't. So I mean, but there had been those little things falling into place. You know, it's amazing how like say how life works. You know.
Yeah, a good example of that is I think in the late 90s, I looked in the LA recycler for an Octopad, and some guys just kind of cold on the phone. Yeah, well, here's where I live. Come up 9 o'clock tonight, you know, and it's $200, whatever. So I go up there, I knock on the door, and it's Ralph.
Oh,
We hadn't seen each other in ages. Oh, man, you know. He was happy that his baby was going to a good home.
Oh,
you know,
God.
I was happy to get a deal. Yeah, you know, just stuff like that. You just, you know, it's all connected.
Wow.
Okay, so Ruth, how did you get in the band?
Okay. You know, I'm a strange case because I was a fan long before I ever played a note for Frank. One of my Juilliard cronies, in fact, I was an actual drummer for 3 years of my life, an actual drummer with a real drum set.
You
Yeah.
said makes sense.
Yeah. and I wasn't world class like you all,
You
but
don't know
I
how
was
much
good
we
enough.
all love you, okay? You don't know how much we love you.
Well.
Come on now.
Anyway, and so here I was at this conservatory, but I was also playing original music by my very good friend at Juilliard, who was also kind of at the outer fringe of Juilliard life. You know, we were there, it was nice to be there, but we weren't that happy doing just that small sliver of what we were doing. And so he would write this fabulous music, and I was the drummer, and then there were 3 other fellows. In fact, we're all still in touch with each other, so that's very special. But anyway, one day Stephen said to me, "You got to hear these crazy guys down at the Garrick Theater. You're not going to believe it." And I said, "Oh, I got homework, and I got this, and why do I want to go?" No, you have to do this. And he came by and grabbed me and made me go see these guys. And he kept saying to me, they play Stravinsky. They play Holst, you know, music from the planets, which if you know absolutely free, you can hear a little bit of that, right? Dun, 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 dun. And so he was smart because he knew that was a way to sort of hook me. Well, okay. So they play the classics. I'll go. And I walk into this little theater, and actually there were 2 timpani up there on stage and a vibraphone. And I remember thinking, oh, well, okay, there's something I can relate to, fine. You know, but I really don't want to be here. And then these guys with very long hair just sort of calmly filed onto stage in a haphazard way, just whenever they felt like it. And then the man that turned out to be Frank Zappa, I actually thought his name was Zappo, because I could hear people going, Zappa, Zappa, and it sounded like Zappo to me. And he walked on stage and strapped on the guitar, and they started playing, and that changed my life. I mean, everything fit, and I knew it at the time. This wasn't a situation of years later I can look back on it and go, yeah, that made sense. That was perfect for me. That embodied everything that was important to me at the time in music. And I loved the fact that there was also a lot of humor going, because at Juilliard, you know, you smile and you're immediately suspect. What's so funny about that? Or you find something funny about the Bach Brandenburgs or whatever. And, but of course, it was essentially the music that got me. But the whole package just fit me perfectly. And then I found myself going down there all the time, whenever I could. Zappa and the mothers were in residence there, or residency, I guess is the word, for about 6 months. So over that time, I managed to get there and hear a bunch of concerts, and got to the point where I could begin to really recognize some of the music and begin to develop my favorites. And the one that I remembered most vividly was "Oh No." Do you guys know that?
Yeah.
Dun, 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 da, da, da. And I've, for years after that, wondered, what is it about that song that just gets me, that got me? And I have theories about it, which is not what this, you know, this discussion is about. But I started to be able to know what those notes were. And one night I was there with my boyfriend at the time and my brother and a whole entourage from Long Island, the suburbs, you know, because now I was being the Steven, saying, you have to come in and see these guys. And that was the night that Motorhead was talking constantly about fixing cars. Jim Black was playing a very simple drum beat. Frank was sitting over to one side of the stage, you know, just staring at the audience with contempt. And we didn't hear a note of anything important to me, and I was very frustrated by that. So the next time I went, I actually took a piece of paper and wrote, "Dear Mr. Zappo, could you please play?" And I wrote out the thing and stuck it on the music stand that was there on stage. And he did. He played it. And then he started noticing me. There were some nights that very few people were in the audience, so he could really pick out the same familiar faces after a while. And then one day, speaking of Tony Williams and Miles Davis, my brother, who is a fantastic music lover and a really decent bass player and piano player and has perfect pitch and all that stuff and has loved music forever, said to me, "We got to go hear the Tony Williams Lifetime. They're playing at the Bitter End. That's on Bleecker Street, right up the street from the Garrick Theater." It was a hot, sultry summer night. It was very humid. The crowds were out. It was the really, I mean, just wall-to-wall people in tie-dye garb and head shops all over the neighborhood. You know, you could almost taste the air. It was just thick with people and with just music everywhere. And while we were standing on line waiting to go into the Bitter End, and I must confess, I remember thinking, oh, I'd much rather be going to see Zappa's show. You know, I just was up for that. Who walks by but Frank? No bodyguards, no nothing. This was in the day where anyone could walk anywhere and feel safe. And my brother says, "Mr. Zappo, you have to meet my sister. She's the greatest marimbist in the world." And I thought, oh my God, oh God, oh God. And I'm wearing a dress with my long, you know, makeup, the whole deal. I was so un-Zappa-like because I was going to a jazz club and wanted to look good. And he turned and looked at me and said, "Bring your marimba down to the theater tomorrow or whatever, and I'll audition." Well, I never did. I just didn't do it. But I kept going to the show. I was thinking, how am I going to get my marimba there? I didn't want to tell my parents, nice Jewish Long Island parents, that I'm going to show up at this club and this weird-looking guy is going to audition me. And I didn't drive a car because I was a New Yorker, and New Yorkers don't know how to drive. And so I just never showed up. And then there's a bunch of stuff that we don't need to talk about. But to finally just cut to the chase, because I'm going on way too long here, I got a phone call a few months later. Apparently, I don't know if my brother had written my phone number down and slipped it to Frank or what, but I get a call. I think it was December of '67. And he said, "Hi, how you doing?" You know, and I'm going, who is this? Frank Zappa, in his clipped way of speaking. Right. And that rings a bell, right, Chester? You can almost hear that voice.
Terse, yeah.
Yeah. And he said, we're doing 2 nights at Town Hall, December 22nd and December 23rd. And I'd like you to play on stage. And I went, "With the Mothers?" And he goes, "No, not actually with the Mothers, but we'd like you to be part of an opening act. There'll be a contortionist, a ballet dancer, a juggler, and you."
And you.
And I said, "Can I bring some of my cronies?" You know, I guess what he remembered was when my brother was spouting off about me, Juilliard, you know, so he must have figured, okay, I can do something. I'm going to music school. I'm not just going to show up and make a complete ass of myself. Though if I had, he would have found a way to use that too, and you know it, right? He would have capitalized on everything and made it work. And so I actually said to him, what do you want us to do? What kind of music are we going to play? He said, do you know the Freak Out album? And I'm going, do I know the Freak Out album? Only every note. He said, maybe you could do a cocktail version of the tunes on Freak Out. And that was right up my alley because, again, my friend Steve, who originally got me to see the Mothers, was and still is, a virtuoso pianist. He's a composer and an orchestrator and a conductor, but oh my God, he could play 1,000 notes, per square foot. He was amazing and do everything by ear. And I got my brother, Terry, you would have loved this, especially when I think about your fabulous video. Oh God, because Charlie showed up with a hi-hat and a snare drum and 2 brushes, and that was his kit to just give a little something. And we had a string bass player, an upright bass player come that was also a good friend, and we played through all these tunes. We had never even rehearsed together. But these, this was my family, my best friend, my brother, and his best friend. And we showed up, and I wore, a sort of fancy, clingy sort of a cocktail thing. And they wore little suits, just the way you would expect to see at a wedding or bar mitzvah. Right. And we played, can you imagine playing that music with a sort of shuffle beat?
Oh, fantastic.
And you know what? We were great.
I bet.
We were great. And then he never called me again, and I went, oh, well, I guess that sucked. And a few months later, he called and said, come on down to Apostolic Studio. We're recording an album called Uncle Meat. We want you to be a part of it. Come on down. I said, now? I was going to say, I'm doing homework. It's midnight. I have a life. But you better believe I went. Yeah. And wow. I had never in my life seen such equipment. I walked in, I saw a million marimbas, vibraphones, xylophones, chimes, everything all over the place. That was my first contact with overdubbing ever. Wow. This was a new thing back then. This is 1968, I guess. And that was when I first really met Ian musically, but didn't meet him personally. But I was having to match something he played. And that's a very strange concept if you think about it. In fact, that happened with me and Vinny. I've never met Vinny, but I played with Vinny. I could actually say, yeah, I played with Vinny. One of my high school kids at school said to me, have you ever met Vinny? And I went, well, I just played with him on Malcolm McNabb's album. Meanwhile, I've never met Vinny in my life. And it was like that with Ian Underwood. I'm matching this guy, and I had no idea who he was. So although he was there at Town Hall, everything was sort of a blur, and I didn't really acquaint myself with all of them. I just wanted to do my job and be a fan and just be amazed. I will never forget those experiences. They were like yesterday to me, as trite as that is to say. They're so sharply ingrained in my brain and were so special. And so I guess you could say my audition was a live performance, just like yours, Ralph.
Yeah, sure was.
And, and it kept going that way. He kept asking me to do things, and then finally when the instruments were tourable or travelable, I was able to do that. Do you remember going to the Musser Marimba Factory? I was with you, and I was with you. Do you remember to see the first Keelan marimbas as they went off the
Where were we
the
at?
machines?
Chicago.
We were in Chicago.
Chicago?
Yeah. Well, I watched on one of the tours that we did. I watched my only, and it was wood, and it was so dear to me, Brentwood marimba, being dropped from approximately a 3-story height. Well, it was in one of the anvil cases, but still, I just went, oh God, that's it for me. And that was one of the first times, one of the many times I quit the band. And then, that's when Frank said, they've invented this new thing. It's Keelan, it's indestructible. And I remember going to the factory with you guys and seeing,
right,
I almost brought it today. I was going to bring it and just show it to you, but it's so old hat now, probably everybody knows it. That weird green color bar, that very heavy, before they spray painted it brown to make it look cosmetic, like a marimba. And I remember holding this thing and hitting it, and it was actually fantastic. And the whole idea that you could have it out in the snow, that you could sit on it, that you could drop anything on it. And in fact, at one of our concerts, a major piece of a scaffolding, I think it was in Boston, did in fact fall on it and nearly killed Frank and me.
Remember that.
He had just walked away from the Uncle Meat setup, right? He was going back to do his guitar stuff. And thank God, because a major part of the ceiling fell. And the only thing that even shows on my Keylon marimba is the tiniest little scratch on the note F sharp. One little scratch where you can see the green color coming out from underneath the paint.
Wow.
And that's all that happened. And I mean, I don't know what the weight of that thing was. It had to be 500 or 600 pounds of something that fell.
I remember
It's
that back
probably
in those
dangerous.
days, touring and stuff was
You remember?
dangerous. You know, those gel
Yes.
frames would
Sure.
always
Yeah, they
fall
would
and
always
stick
fall.
in like a
Colliding and
knife
stuff.
from
Yes.
2 stories up, you know, into the wooden stages.
And I always marveled that nobody, at least of the musicians, was killed, you know? Although,
well, some were.
Although Frank broke his
you know.
leg falling down
Yes.
into the pit.
Well, that
Yeah.
was a push, but
Oh, were
Yeah.
you on that tour?
I was not on that tour.
no, that
but
was before,
Yeah.
before our time.
Yeah, I'd heard stories, but
Yeah, that was really a
Was that in
life-altering
probably
experience
England?
for him, for Frank. He was never the same.
and the equipment overwhelm thing was something I felt too.
Yeah.
I had fiber cases. You know, if I left them out in the rain, they were warped. And I
Yeah.
walked in to my audition where you guys had been at the place on Bronson and Van Ness there. And I had never seen, he had a stage, he had sound and lighting equipment of his own, he had anvil cases. I'd never seen an anvil case, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
And, you know, just and the most difficult music spread out all over the stage and, you know, two
That must have been
octopus
so
drum.
Another world.
intimidating.
Yeah, 2 octopus
different
drum
world.
sets and
Yeah.
drummers were failing. One would set up while the other would, you know, would audition and they were just,
Oh,
nope,
God.
sorry, next,
Wow.
you know, and yeah, I mean, it was frightening. And so, you know, I said, well, I turned to the other drummers. I said, I'm sure as hell not going to get this gig, you know. So I heard that Weather Report was looking for a drummer, and they said, well, Chester, Frank's drummer, left to join Weather Report. And I'm like, oh no, you know, I mean, this is like even more like, God, that guy who's so great on this record, now he's with my hero band too, and you know. So my thing, first thing up, read Approximate.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And I,
So,
Okay.
you know,
and I have it right here, by the
Yeah,
way. I
and-
wanted to show it
yeah.
to Chester especially, because that's one of the greatest things I ever heard in my life is you on that volume 2. You can't do that on stage anymore. That is monumentally incredible.
But now
it's in
you
there for you
guys-
to see. I want you to
You
see it
got
and tell me if you
Approximate here?
remember.
you
playing
guys
it.
actually danced that one night.
Yeah, and we sang it too.
We used to have to dance
Oh,
it in
no,
restaurants.
just whatever came out of our
Oh
mouths.
man,
It was so
Let me
fast.
explain.
Yeah,
Approximate is a piece written with precise rhythms
it's
up
in
and
there,
down
yeah.
the staff
The drum
melodically, but
parts
it's
in
written
there
with
and the,
X's, so you can
melody
just improvise
parts.
whatever
There you
pitches you
go.
want as long as you cop the melodic curve. So the cacophony
be
in
together.
unison that results is similar to like Monk or some through composed classical music. It's a startling and amazing, you know, concept.
There you
Yeah,
go.
This
here
is
it
for
is.
everybody else.
Three,
yeah.
4.
This is impossible.
Yeah, all right. But at any rate, yeah, the stories were, you know, I remember getting to the 13 tuplets somewhere along here and going, okay, that's dubba 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 whatever, and explaining to Frank that I understood it, even though I couldn't sight read it at tempo, but at least I understood the curve of what he wanted.
Wow.
And
Right.
that was enough for him to
Right.
say, okay, as long as you understand
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
he sort of let it, you know,
Yeah,
my
he
reading
had faith
chops
that
slip
you
by.
could
about
get
that?
it together.
Yeah.
Which
And then,
you
you know,
did.
we played in 19 with Duke soloing. We played, he asked me to memorize forts, you know.
Oh, yeah.
So here, it's a series of 5s, and then there's a
Yeah.
9 and a 10 and 11 or something,
Yeah,
and it comes
yeah.
back to 1. So I did the best I could at that. And then he goes, okay, I just want to hear you play a blues shuffle, see what your feel's like. So we just, you know, swang a bit,
Yeah.
and he says, I want to hear you again after I hear the rest of these guys. You sound good.
Yeah.
He turns to Perellis. Perellis turns to the other 25 drummers who start shaking their heads, and Perellis turns around and goes, that's it, Terry. Or that's it, Frank. Nobody else wants to audition after Terry. So Frank turns to me and
Oh,
goes,
wow.
looks like you got the gig if you want it.
Wow.
And I just said, are you sure I can do this? You know, the same words that when he told me, I think it's time for you to go off and do your own thing, leave the band. I said, are you sure I can do this? You know? So, yeah, what an amazing, and then that night, you know, took me down to Westlake and played me this new material and Gregory Peccary, and just, I
Yeah,
was just,
yeah.
oh my God.
Which is actually old material.
I know.
That new material is very old.
I know. I
Yeah.
know. was just brought up about how none of us were ever satisfied with Frank's music. There's this movie I saw where Picasso just paints and Truffaut filmed it, and everything was destroyed after. And almost every brushstroke Picasso made, you want to go, oh, stop, that's incredible.
Yes.
And then he'll add another thing, and you go,
Yep.
oh, now stop. You know, that's and it just kept changing. And all of us felt this way, right? As these tunes were developing, there'd be something that would just strike a chord in you, and you'd want to keep it that way, and he would always change it to something that you didn't
That's
like, right?
Yeah.
And then, you know, how
Sometimes it would change for the better.
this
Yeah,
is true.
yeah.
I mean,
Maybe-
Yes,
Inca
that's
Roads,
true.
what
Yeah.
he did to Inca Roads
That's true.
Yeah.
was amazing.
Yeah.
And
But
with
it's not
George
on
singing-
record like that, is it?
Isn't it on One Size Fits
I
All?
think
Yeah.
But
that's
I mean,
a
is it that
masterpiece.
version you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, One Size Fits All is the record that came off after I left, but
Yeah.
I played all that music.
Yeah.
and then it got recorded.
Yeah.
And I remember all that music, and Inca Roads was just the way Frank put that one together.
Yeah.
And you know,
Yeah,
and the
true.
process was so interesting anyhow. I mean, more than likely he would come in with an idea and he'd start putting it together, you know, on at the rehearsal. Okay, you do this, you do that, okay. Now let's go back and let's review. Okay, right here I want to do this. Let's change it here, and Bruce is writing frantically,
Right.
and Napoleon's writing frantically, and I've got my little tape recorder behind there rolling. Thank
Is
God,
that your
'cause
secret?
That was
I
my
never knew
secret.
that.
I went home every night and reviewed the rehearsal. So when I came back
Wow.
the next day, at least one of us knew what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
Because Frank would go, "What did we do?" And
That's right.
And I'd be able to remind him, "Well, actually, this is what we did."
Yeah.
And it was a way for me to get my stuff together, because how could you remember all that? Because I wasn't writing stuff down. I thought the tape recorder would be my lifesaver, and as it turns
Yeah.
out, it was.
Yeah.
Because through the course of 3-4 weeks of rehearsals, we'd go through various renditions of
man.
these tunes until
true.
finally we decide, okay, that's it.
Right.
Memorize.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? No music on stage. Everything had to be memorized.
Yeah.
Yep,
And then
always.
for me, every sound check was a rehearsal, and every night we were playing some new arrangement anyway. So
Right.
it just stretched you beyond what you'd think you could do. But we were talking about this idea of, like Chester was just talking about Village of the Sun, which is a beautiful tune, and then having to play it boom chick version.
That's right.
Chad has a great story where, because he had literally, how many, 100 and something tunes were in the book when you were in the band?
Well, by the last tour, there were 120.
120
The
tunes,
band had
right?
memorized.
Yeah, memorized,
band
okay?
memorized.
By
And
that
I
point,
mean,
we'd memorized.
yeah, I
We had
mean,
five,
like,
over 5 2-hour shows, we could.
Wow.
yeah, from the most
Change
difficult
up the
stuff to
stuff.
the most inane. And
Yeah.
then this one night, Frank did for the whole.
Oh, well,
What is
for
that?
Those
it's-
of you who don't know, who are watching, Frank always had visual cues, and I realize now that he did them since way back, but you would learn a tune in a certain style, and then if you did this, that would mean make it reggae starting the next quarter note, or he'd sometimes give you 2 beats, a little cue, then it'd be rattly-dat with like 3 and 4, and then everybody would shift gears. The guitar players would go from distortion sound, they'd click on the clean tone and rattly-dat and chink it and chink chink, chink. Whatever the tune was before, now it's reggae. And as a default, we decided, okay, we'll make it shuffle reggae, swing reggae. Then he had this is ska, and then this one was Weather Report. So the bass player would kind of go distorted and start walking, kind of semi-Jocko-ish, and I'd have to do like a double time, kind of swing
Wow.
pattern with the
Yeah.
backbeat,
Yeah.
and so
And then this
but,
is obviously so funny that
Yeah.
we play one show in Indiana, I think it was. And so, we start off with the first tune, then we introduces the band, then we get on to the show with the vocal tunes, and he, tweaks one, okay, reggae, so fine. Then I just see him get this big grin on his face, and the next tune, reggae again. Okay, he did it for the whole show. He made the entire show reggae. Like even the complicated stuff, we'd have to like play some odd time stuff, but then when it kind of went to a groove, it'd be reggae again. The whole show. So in
Fantastic.
Indiana,
yeah,
they got like the Bob Marley version
yeah,
of
right,
Zappa.
Muffin Man or something really heavy, just the
Oh,
whole
yeah.
damn show reggae, man. That was one of the
But
funniest
that was one of the,
stories.
like anything can happen at any time for no reason whatsoever. That
Yeah.
was one of his favorite lines he used to tell interviewers.
Yeah.
So I'm actually thinking that as time went on, each drummer really had almost a harder job to do because, as you say, you know, the book just got bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, I remember the days when there really wasn't a book. There was nothing.
Wow.
And also, especially for my instruments, I didn't have to try to fill anyone else's shoes. I wasn't having to think, oh my God, I can't hold a candle to that percussionist. There
No, it's the
really
rest.
hadn't been one.
The rest of them couldn't hold a candle to you after,
no,
or
Terry,
since,
please.
right? I mean,
no,
you know.
but I'm just thinking when he
Ed,
talks about
Billy,
100,
all of them were-
oh, stop.
Yeah, Bill.
120 tunes in a book and all those signals. I mean,
Well,
I
there
never
really
saw
was no
those signals
book.
before.
Either we each had our own.
Those
We
were
each
newer.
make our own, or
Right.
maybe.
Okay, so it's a figure of
maybe
speech.
40% was written.
Right. Well, no,
You know,
I didn't mean literally,
yeah.
you know, a book bound in black and called Zappa. You know, but to still carry all that around, you know, it was taxing. Do you guys remember in Dupree's Paradise, the thing would start, there would be a vamp,
Right.
and then it would be the
Right.
right? And do you remember that became a hand signal? No, that motif or theme
Yes.
he then used. I forgot what the
That's-
actual hand signal.
that's right.
But we had to play it in triplets. Da 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 da. Instead of da 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 da. I can't even speak
And then
as
there was a
fast. Instead
slow
of like
motion
that.
version of it too. Da, 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 da,
Yes,
da, da,
yes.
da, da.
And
I go to the
thought-
cowbells and do
I
that.
thought that was hard. When I listen to Chad talk about those, I can't deal with it. I can't even believe that you had to do that.
But we'd practice shifting gears at rehearsal.
Ah.
Too. He'd do it
of
randomly on any
course.
tune. You know,
Okay.
And he would play the band that way too, just as, you know,
Yes.
improvise some days and just like, you know, make sound sculptures and little things like there was some stuff with a poodle and a love doll. I remember he used to do pantomime with, and the band knew
Oh, yeah,
exactly
build-
what to play
build
to,
a girl.
you know, building.
Yeah.
Build a girl.
Oh,
that was
Build a
it.
Girl.
Which made it onto a record. It's on one of the. I've been listening to a lot of this stuff in the last few weeks. Volume 1. I think it's on Volume 1.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great piece.
Yeah.
That's a great piece. I love, even though it's different every night, obviously. But look at this. I'm talking about it as if it's happening in present time.
But no, I'd like to bring up too.
Oh.
It is.
I mean-
Time is not. Show me a
it's-
scientist who can prove time exists.
Terry.
They can't. They can't.
I could tell by my
it's just
hair
a
color
perception.
that time marches on.
That's- yeah.
Yes,
But, you
I
know.
agree.
Yeah, right.
But Chad, how did you get? You came from an extraordinarily musical family. I had your brother out here the other day.
Yeah, Brooks was out here, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then John is a great drummer who I'm going to do a duet with pretty soon. You've
Great.
got your other brother who plays bass.
Bob, yeah,
and
he's a
your
terrific bass
father who is a drummer,
drummer and
and
music-
a
high school music
wow.
teacher,
Yeah,
yeah, teaches
and then,
jazz.
So
Yeah.
you were pretty damn prepared, I would imagine, as a guy going into Frank. How did you get the
Nobody
audition?
should be prepared. I don't. No, not for that audition. And I mean, I'll get to there. But I remember asking once I had the gig on some plane flight we had, and I was sitting next to Frank. I said, you know, I don't know how anybody can actually prepare for that audition with all the steps that, you know, you're asking somebody to be kind of a symphonic player. You're asking to be a good bebop player, a good Latin player. You're asking to be a good reggae player, and an authentic heavy metal drummer, and then be able to solo and then interact, you know, all these things, and then read 20th century classical music, hard 20th century classical music. And then we were talking about, I don't know, polyrhythms and odd times, and he said, well, you know, it's completely unnatural to play in 4/4. and I said, what are you talking about? What do you mean? And he said, well, you don't speak in 4/4. And I thought, well, you're right.
Yeah,
You're
Wow.
absolutely right. You speak in phrases. And
Yeah.
then I thought, well, yeah, if you look at this stuff, it's really mathematical
Yeah.
looking, but you know, he always demanded that it would groove,
Yeah.
and he would loop things, like if you loop a 13 or whatever, you know, he'd loop it over and over until you could get like a groove going, like it's in 13/8 or something, then stick it on a 4/4 bar.
Yeah.
And- but anyway, okay, so my audition, that's 1981. I'm 21 years old, and a bass player friend of mine had auditioned. And I didn't know, but he was holding an open cattle call audition at his house for 3 weeks, and I heard about a bass player friend of mine, Kevin Brandon. He's a great bass player. He played with Aretha, and I used to do little casuals with him and a couple funk gigs and stuff, just really low paying stuff, but it was fun because he was playing. He called me up one day and said, look, man, yesterday I was at Zappa's house. Here's his phone number. He's looking for a bass player and a drummer. He said, I didn't get it. And you know, a friend of his told him about a drummer friend. And when he found out his drummer friend didn't get it, he called me. So I thought, Kevin, you're crazy. I said, I don't know any of his music. I'd heard The Black Page once because a friend of mine played it, and I think I might have had one record with Vinny on it. And it wasn't until I talked to a couple of friends of mine. I talked to Jim Cox because we played a lot together, brilliant keyboard player. And Jim said, "Look, oh man, you've got to audition. Just call him up." He said, "You'll get a funny story out of it." He didn't think I'd make it either. He just wanted to hear the humor.
Right.
So I thought, well, he's right. What do I have to lose?
Yeah.
I have absolutely nothing. I'm not going to make it, but it'll be a fun experience, and I'll just go in kind of knowing I'm not going to make it. So I called him up, and he answered the phone. I wasn't expecting that. So it's like, hello. I said, Mr. Zappa, I'm a drummer, and I live in Los Angeles. My name is Chad Wakerman, and I heard that you're auditioning drummers. And he said, yeah, we've been auditioning for 3 weeks, and promised the band I'm going to stop in 3 days. They've had enough. I said, well, have you found anybody? He said, no, nobody can cut it. Real clip. Yeah. Okay. And I said, well, would it be possible to get an audition? I'd love to come up and, if I can. He said, well, do you read? And I said, well, yeah, I do read. And he said, well, are you a good reader or are you a phenomenal reader?
Oh.
And I said, well, look, I know your music's reputation as far as notation and stuff. I've had a little experience in symphonies, and I do session work, and I played in big bands and percussion ensembles and things like this, and I'd love to give it a shot. And he said, okay, fine. Well, can you be here in an hour? So I said, hey, why not? Sure. At this point,
Wow.
So I loaded my drums in my little truck that I had at the time, and I was living in the valley, so I drove up to the top of Mulholland there, and buzzed the gate, and then somebody let me in, and it was complete chaos around. Like there were construction workers there. They were building a tape vault out of his garage at the time, and his daughter Diva, who was very, very small then, she was having a birthday party. So there were like little kids all around, and moms, and I'm going, is there a studio here? And then somebody pointed me to this door, so I walk up this walkway and knock on the door, and this guy answers the door, and he has long blue hair, and he's got like a really tight leopard skin shirt on, and some like rock and roll jewelry, and tight leather pants. And I'm here for the drum audition, and my, is this the right spot? He's going, yeah, come on in. I'm Steve Vai. Here's Ray White, and Ed Mann's over there. He plays percussion, and Tommy Mars, and Frank will be out in a couple minutes, so just sit here in the control room. And then Frank came out. I met him briefly, and he said, "Oh, I'm running a little bit late. You can hear a couple. There's a couple guys ahead of you. You can just stay in the control room in the studio and hear the audition." So I heard a couple really quick auditions, because he had the charts on the music stand first, and you had to kind of get through. This is 1981, so he's been auditioning a lot of bands and a lot of drummers by this time. So I think he really had his audition. Step-by-step process down. So the first thing was playing the music. One guy just obviously couldn't read, so it was like he was there for about 15 seconds, shook his hand, and that was it. Another guy did okay, but got lost, and so that was it. So it was like, Wakerman, you're next, And I went up to this kid. It had a funky little, like 20-inch Ludwig bass drum and a couple of the concert toms from your kits. A flat ride cymbal, a 13-inch piccolo snare, like oddball.
Have a Ruth set up.
And probably.
Exactly.
And okay, on the music stand was The Black Page. It was Drowning Witch Interlude, which is the classical section, the hard section, Alien Orifice, which was a new tune that he had written, the hard section, and it was Mo and Herb's Vacation, which was the hardest thing I'd have ever seen.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Gotta see that.
So he gave me a couple minutes to look it over, and I thought, and he said, well, look, don't worry so much about the hitting the right drum, because he marked all the.
Right.
It was like a mallet part,
Yeah.
It was written kick,
Yep.
snare, hi-hat,
Oh yeah.
cymbals, and 5 toms, 3 roto toms, and a timpani pedal roto, castanets and cowbell, and china cymbal. So it was all had a key.
Don't worry
and,
about hitting the right drum.
Yeah, just play the rhythms, And so I didn't play it perfectly. I didn't even come close, but like quintuplets and things I knew I could play, so I thought, I'm just going to nail those. I'm going to play them real loud so he knows I can play them. And like the 11s over 3, and so I'm just going to play time through that. And I thought, I was determined not to get lost in the tune. So at least I could play some of the things, and if I just played time, I thought, and it kind of worked. He knew I had kind of potential to do it, and I kind of knew the form of the piece by sight reading it. So, and they might have been licks off of Joe's Garage, which were probably older licks, you know, but it all that stuff. And so he played it for maybe 10 minutes, just no stopping, and Ed Mann's there bored, playing it perfectly, you know. So it was obvious if you got off, you know. And then he said, fine, now solo over it, you know, count it off again. So you're trying to solo over 19 and 21. So, but because I'd gone to the Don Ellis Clinic when I was about 10 years old. But
Familiar with the
sitting behind Ralph's
familiar with
drums.
the book, Even in the Odds, which you co-authored, which you authored by then.
You know, I'm 10 and 11, like trying to figure out what Ralph's doing on this tune that's in 33/8. So I kind of knew odd times. I had experience with that, and was in Hank Levy's band at Stan Kenton clinics, and so because of those guys, it had helped me for this audition. So anyway, so next was the odd time stuff, and I kind of did okay with that. So the next thing he did was he put on his guitar and just picked a bass player, and it was just power trio, and he just improvised. And I had like this flashback, because when I was 10, the first rock concert I saw was Jimi Hendrix with Mitch Mitchell, Billy Cox, and Jimi Hendrix.
Which, by the way, Frank liked very much. He would go out of his way to hear them.
Well, as soon as I started playing, and because he had a Marshall stack there, and he played loud, and it played these great phrases and really flowing, I had just goosebumps. It was like, I feel like I'm back at that concert again. It just had that flexible kind of vibe to it. So I was going, hey, life is good.
Playing with Frank, that did feel good. It was a lot of fun.
So that ended the first day, and he said, look, I think you have potential to do the gig, but I have 2 more days of auditions, and a couple guys are flying out from Europe and New York on their own nickel. And, you know, because by this time, you guys had made this gig legendary, and there's PIT now, full of drummers and everybody. You know, a lot of drummers had heard about it, so guys were flying out from Europe on their own dime. So he said, look, what I'll do, I'll pay you the same amount of money. If you'll come back for the next 2 days, I'll pay you basically to audition for the next 2 days. I just want to hear you play more. And he said, if I hear somebody else who I think has potential, I want to A-B you.
Oh, man.
So I want to directly, like, if they sound pretty good, I want you to play the same piece they're playing right after them. So I can, like,
Oh, man.
So the audition process got much more difficult.
Seriously hardcore.
So it was. I had a 3-day audition.
Damn.
And luckily nobody really was that great in the next 2 days. And so, you know, and he's giving me stacks of music to look at and take home and bring back. And so the 3rd day, night I go home, and I get a call from him, and he said, well, look, I've had a meeting with the band, which surprised me. And he said, we've decided to offer you the gig, and here's the deal. I just bought a recording truck from the Beach Boys. I'm going to record every single show, might record some rehearsals. We're going to rehearse for 3 months. We're going to practice 8 hours a day. The tour's 3 months long, but might be extended. So pays this amount of money. Are you interested?
Yeah.
You know.
In other words, Semper Fi. Hooah! The Marines, son.
So I said,
you know?
I said, yeah, absolutely. I can't believe he's saying this to me. But then before he hangs up, he said, well, I just wanted to tell you that you got the gig because I like your feel.
Oh, how nice.
I mean, and I thought, after all that math and all that.
That's right. But that's where he had taste, man, you know. And I know from playing with you what that means. I know what that means.
But I kind of figured it out after being on the band for about a month. Is like, well, really, if you practice hard enough, you could learn the stuff.
That's right.
You really, really could if you just shed the time and figure out the stickings, how to get over it, and you could, but he was actually looking for the part where he puts on his guitar and blows for 15 minutes.
time to, you know, acclimate myself to it. And then, you know, we did this thing, and Frank noticed that all the players who had to come in and sight read it, because they were known for that, seemed to live in mortal terror. And they would gather around the Coke machine or the coffee urn at breaks and live in fear that they were going to get called for a cornflake commercial on a Monday morning that would and be faced with the black page so full of notes and so fast that they couldn't play it, right? And then their jobs and their you know, reps and everything would be lost. So Frank thought that was hilarious, and so he said, I'm going to write my own black page, you know, and then he referred to it as it being high in statistical density.
I love that phrase.
You know, fantastic.
That's right, which made it to the album.
Yeah.
It made it to the record.
So,
so you know, now it's a famous piece.
Yeah,
and the name The Black Page has a mystique about it. And I mean, I have a theory about the composition. First of all, it's a fantastic piece of music.
Yeah,
it is.
You know,
This is what I had to play.
and when I listen to it on the record, I can't help but think that you're playing the hi-hat mainly because, well, maybe for two reasons. Number one, to give the audience some clue as to where these rhythms are at, so that they have,
Or the band.
or
Yes,
it could also be
exactly.
for the band.
It's like a click track.
Because I think that Frank wrote the tune certainly not with the hi-hat in mind.
Yeah, but he did tell me play the hi-hat along with it, keep time, and so I kind of learned it that way. And I'd forgot that that wasn't written in, and so many people talk about that, and it's a real overlooked thing for me. It's just, you got to be tapping something to play that stuff.
Well, you do, but I mean,
You
as
know,
a
so-
listener, if you take away the hi-hat for a second, and then as a listener, hear the music in space as opposed to according to regular time, and it takes on a whole different dimension.
It's
you know,
beautiful.
especially when you get to the 5/16 section. You know, that's a new tempo.
Yeah.
And without the quarter note, it sounds like you're somewhere else, and then
Yeah.
suddenly you're back. You know,
Yeah.
and then all the the stretching, the rubber band phrases. You know, that occur. It's you know, when you take the hi-hat away, it's a whole different piece.
Yeah, and he was a master at that. I just love the notes. It's like such an out piece, but it's also consonant.
Yeah,
You know,
it
he
is.
uses
It's beautiful.
like seconds and fourths and sixths and just lots of just really you know, kind of pan diatonic. It just works. You know, it's so easy to hear the melody of that, and he had a knack at choosing the right notes. For making a point, you know, it wasn't just any random note.
No.
And he could put them together that just took you like really edgy out when he wanted to be atonal, or he could put it, you know, way inside and beautiful, and then have maybe the rhythm be the focal point of the outness. And so then once again, there's this balance, you know. Slonimsky talks about that. There's a balance in music that says that if something's real heavy melodically, it can't be as heavy harmonically or rhythmically. And people have tried to serialize this, and they've made shit music, you know. So one thing, if you think of, say, Indian music, where rhythm and melody are high, then harmonically it's on a drone to compensate. So there's this balance aspect, and Frank had a real good way, intuitively, of knowing what to do that, you know, just balanced his pieces, you know. He's phenomenal at that.
Terry,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Just a quick question. Do you think Frank's drumming style affected you, influenced you?
Yeah, you know, because I think where his drumming style came from was ionization. You know, he was way into doing that, and he suggested
But
things.
he did have certain kind of things that he'd gravitate towards when he
Yeah.
wrote a drum. Like
Absolutely. Well, these
I can
rhythms.
even think of like he loved the sound of two like snare and floor tom, then bass drum being the other part of a line, like
Yeah, all that stuff. He said
Like-
Shelly Manne was one of the only guys who could read hand to foot stuff when he first started hiring studio musicians. And then, you know, like 200 Motels has like massive stuff in Uncle Meat that's all that way, all written out. Ainsley played, you know, and that's why Ainsley got the gig, you know. And he's another one of my favorites. I just love him. And, you know, he liked that about me, and he knew what hip was as a drummer. He knew Tony. He may not say, I like Miles or I like Tony. As a matter of fact, he hated them openly. But on the other hand, he knew what hip was, and he had really good taste. And to prove it, the introduction of the Black Page is a note-for-note rip-off of me playing out of a 10-minute drum solo, one little thing that's note-for-note rip-off of Tony Williams off a Stanley Clarke album.
Oh, really?
And Zappa obviously had very good taste because he took those two bars to do the intro, and there was immortalized on vinyl,
before
me
the
ripping
ink,
off. Yeah.
the bit before the
Yeah, right
composed it,
before the
yeah.
actual composition
Yeah.
starts. It's a little drum solo thing, just a blah, blah, blah.
Well,
It's right off
that's
Tony.
not your improvisation?
It was an
It is.
improvisation, but that section was note for note Tony Williams off Stanley Clark's Born to Love You or one of those
Okay,
records,
okay,
in the
right.
70s. And it was like the newest, hippest thing Tony had done, and I was stealing it, and I was working
And it sounded so cool.
It's one of those moments where you go,
Yeah.
okay, well, I can't do that as good as Tony even, so where's Terry in all this, So after I left Frank were the lessons of how do I begin my own style, and Bruford with sounds and those choices, approaching it linear melodic instead, started to sink in. And then later on, all of my experiences, Zappa and all this stuff started to come in. I started to write classical stuff and, things like that. But yeah,
Did you guys feel the same when you worked with him? Did you get drumistic things that you took from it, or not so much?
Not really.
No?
No, not for me. I mean, like I say, again, I kind of came in on the back door of what Ralph had already did.
Mm-hmm.
So my function there was different. Because he's, as much as said, it's like, well, his instructions to me were, I really want this stuff to be, it's the feel. I want a little more of the funk side. If you can learn everything perfectly, great, but don't worry about that. Ralph can do that,
Mm-hmm.
My own work ethic that anyway, was that I'm going to learn this. There's no way I'm going to be up there faking parts,
Oh, yeah. You
So I
can.
just really set out to really try and learn it. So it was kind of an open book. It was kind of like I was there to double with Ralph, but not to mimic him, and then, and it got to be with his solos. It was very strange for me at first, but what he wanted me to do in his solos, he was wanting me to follow him mathematically, which I'm sure he probably told you guys the same thing. It wasn't. So I'd be playing, and I got to, if you're there long enough, you get to hear his figures, and you kind of know not know what's coming, but you can immediately know what it is when you're hearing it. And so the challenge for me was that trying to keep a pocket. But if he rips into a 7 or a 9 or something, trying to be there with him, and it got to the point where we actually could do it, which was like, couldn't think about it. There was no way you couldn't think about it and do it. But I got used to hearing how he played and was able to kind of track with him. So, but the things were written, exactly. They were certainly written exactly, and I tried to learn them that way. But there always needed to be something different. Like I say, either if he didn't write it for us to, two specifically different parts, then we kind of worked out things so that we were, it was just different. It was kind of like, I felt like I had a really easy time hearing what you guys went through, actually. But, as much as it was, as specifically as he wrote it, I wasn't there to do I kind of had to play it and stay out of his way at the same time. So,
Could I say a couple of things?
Yeah, please.
They're sort of building up, so I hope I can remember, or that they're still relevant. For
No, they are.
Probably the moment
It's
has
all
passed.
relevant.
Well, I didn't want to give the impression that I had a free ride for an audition, because he did finally make me walk through the fire. When I heard your story, I got to tell you, I'm sitting here, and my heartbeat is racing, and my palms are starting to get wet, and I'm really feeling as if, oh my God, it's I'm experiencing what you're saying. That's just harrowing, and it all comes back to me. He did actually put me through hell finally at one point, which was when I was no longer just recording with him every now and then, and he really wanted me to tour. He was auditioning for the Grand Wazoo, for the touring band, the touring version of that, though I wasn't on the album. And he had 3 of LA's finest studio guys. And I don't want to mention their names. They're still in LA. They're still playing. They're great. I didn't even know at the time how great they were, because I just wasn't part of that world, having just moved out from New York. The studio guys in those days were sort of anonymous. And I had to do everything that they had to do, and it was the tough stuff. It was Gregory Peccary and all of that hard music. Well, I might even have some of it there. And at the end of it, and it did take 3 days, just like yours, at the end of it, I found out that I got the gig, and what I heard from Gail was that Frank always knew he wanted me to do it. He just wanted to make sure that I could stand up under the pressure and do it. So that if we toured to, in Europe, I wouldn't suddenly walk out on stage and see vast quantities of people and go, oh my God, and run away. And, I just thought that was cruel in a way because, well, I mean, what about the other guys? I don't even mean cruel toward me.
Oh,
He knew all along that he wanted it to be me, and here they are, auditioning, playing this tough music, going through hell.
Yeah, but they got stories from it.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
like, it's like
They're telling all their
I
friends.
guess so.
It's like, you hate your drill sergeant at first, but then you love your drill
Yeah.
sergeant
Yeah.
because he's like a mother hen, and
Yeah.
all those things that he puts you through
I
are
know.
something you'll
Well,
need on
that's
the field of battle.
Terry, that is a whole other topic about the
it is.
ambivalence, about the complicated relationships
Yeah.
between every musician and Frank.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
only drummers and percussionists,
Sure.
Oh, sure.
but
right.
all of us. And
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons, in fact, why even though Frank is gone, and I can't even believe he's been gone since December of '93, is it? That we still talk about him, we still think about him, we still, we still remember these
Yeah.
these events in our lives.
I swear, the only good part about him not being here anymore is
Yeah.
my fear went away when he died. My fear that he would call me to do something I was
Wow.
not ready for and put me through that again as an adult.
And Terry, can I tell you something? I had more fear after he died. My fear was that I would never encounter music I wanted to play again. And it's only happened a couple of times, and I've done those other things. And truly, except for Bach and Mozart, going back to my roots and piano, there really isn't any great motivating force in my life to get me to uncover the marimba and try to even get around the keyboard anymore.
Okay.
It's the music.
I hereby
and it's
vow
not there
to write a
anymore.
piece of music for you, Ruth.
Okay, I hereby
Just for
accept
you.
the
I'll
challenge.
work with
Alright.
you.
And-
You could,
And Terry, dear, there's something else I wanted to say, which is just because we had this stack. This is the drum part to a piece that I don't think you ever had to play. And guys, this is the rest of it. This is a piano reduction that was published, so I feel fine to bring it. But it was really sort of an homage to the Strav, as I call him, Stravinsky. You were saying that Frank's drum style, you think, came out of, or largely out of Varese. I got to tell you, to me, it came almost completely out of Stravinsky.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys know L'Histoire de Soldat.
Yeah.
Yes,
Sure.
I do.
Okay, well, that's so like it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's melodic drumming.
Yep.
You wrote that book also. And this is back in '68, for goodness sake.
Yeah, and I mean, literally, your setup was pretty much that setup, L'Histoire de Soldat setup, right? Did that have a marimba in it, though?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
What, L'Histoire? No.
Yeah, no,
No,
just
no,
drums.
there's no
Yeah,
melody
it was like
percussion.
gorgeous
Yeah,
drums.
drums.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the triangle, there was a wood block, I think, tambourine, and
Yes.
just-
Oh, and by the way, someone mentioned a piccolo, 13-inch piccolo drum. Was it you, dear, at your audition? God, I sound so motherly,
yours?
dear. That was Frank's drum, and I got to tell you, I'm going to go to my grave wondering about this. About 6 months before he died, he called me up. And it was he actually on the phone. It wasn't someone else that he got to dial the number because he really was sick. And he wanted to know if I had any idea where that piccolo drum was, which I thought was kind of strange because he had used that drum long after my time with him. So how in the world would I possibly, I couldn't say, oh, you don't remember we lost it in Austin, Texas,
Yeah,
or
right.
something like that. He had it, you're telling me, at his house. But I just thought that was the most poignant, heartbreaking thing, that with everything he was dealing with and the physical pain he was in and the rush to try to get as much done as possible before he couldn't work anymore, he's obsessing over what happened to the piccolo drum. Yeah. And now I'm obsessing about it.
Yeah.
Where the hell is that 13-inch
Well, you know
piccolo
that
drum?
there was a storage trailer that was like a semi off wheels that was in the parking lot of where we used to rehearse, and somebody broke into that and stole a bunch of stuff, and a lot of it came back because they I don't know, somehow traced it, the serial numbers and stuff, but yeah, so perhaps that happened, I don't know.
Wow. But can you imagine, out of the blue, he calls me to ask me about that? And it wasn't a confrontational, what happened to my, it was, do you have any idea where it is? He wanted that drum.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
God knows what.
Well, man, the reason why I say Varese, I know he loved Stravinsky as well,
Yeah,
and you can
yeah.
hear so much of that in his music. And when he would go over to your setup when you were gone,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and it was there set up,
Yeah.
he would always play that kind of out classically ionization-y
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And you know, he at one point he said, you know, you're really good at all this going around the toms and junk, but you know, orchestrationally, I would like to hear something different. You know, what do you think about instead? You have what, 5 toms? Yeah. What about 5 different things like an anvil, a wood block, a cowbell, a tambourine, and a triangle, and play your same things, but it'll just be. And like I couldn't,
Yeah.
I just couldn't go there then. I was still holding on too much. But like I want to be like Tony, or I want to be like
Yeah.
Billy, or you know, I can't do that. And
Yeah, sure.
He suggested rototoms, right? I couldn't do that. One of the reasons why is because I couldn't figure out how to mount them. So later I actually got into the mechanic thing, and with a very complex little setup, got 360 degrees mobility and moved rototoms. Because remember that on the Octoplus drums, those drums were so big that the tom holder was way out at the front of the bass
That's
drum.
right. Mhm.
Right? So there's no way you could mount a rototom on that and play it out
Yeah,
there. You'd
that's
have to
right.
reach out 2 feet. So I figured out a way to come off that and make it comfortable, and started using them in Missing Persons. So many things like this. You know,
Yeah.
Missing Persons itself, he said, you know, well, I built a studio, you know, and we're up there talking to him in demo land, you know, making little, with little blast boxes, our you know, demos and junk. And he goes, yeah, I like this, you know, good luck with it and all. And he goes, well, you know, I built this studio, and it's just about done, and I'm going to go on the road. What do you say, you know, if you're working with Ken Scott, who he appreciated as a great engineer, did Billy Cobham and, you know, Tony and lots of Jeff Beck, Simon Phillips, he goes, why don't you have Ken Scott come up here and you can make your demo. You'll help me by getting all the bugs out of my studio. So when I come off the road, I'll know it'll work, and you'll have a demo. And I mean, that's how Missing Persons started. You know, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have what we ultimately sold, you know, just, you know, incredibly influential.
Was one drum fill that became famous.
That he wrote.
No, that he said, Chester and Ralph, I want you to insert something here. And it was on the tune More Trouble Every Day.
Sure.
Right.
And you know the thing I'm talking about.
Yeah.
There's this
absolutely.
horn line.
Yeah.
Ba-da, 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 ba-da. So
Back up again.
So
Second.
exactly.
Oh, yeah,
so, but that rhythm really is a parody of the horn line that just comes before it, you know, and so Chester and I worked it out, and then next thing I know, I'm hearing Chester and Phil Collins using it
Absolutely.
with was it Genesis?
Oh yeah. First day of rehearsal, day I walked in. All right, how you play the lick? How do you play it? Come on, man. How do you play the lick? It's like, I mean, the first day, that was the first
That's
thing
so
he said to
funny.
me. It was like, how do you
But
play
I
the
mean,
lick?
that's such a.
It's the basis
Yeah.
of almost every double bass tom fill
Well,
that I
yeah,
do.
yeah.
Well, we did it with
But you had all those
with
toms,
one
too.
bass drum though, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. But it was just, it
Well,
was
you had
one of
that
those
fast
licks that
Bass
just,
drums were always opposite, though.
Yeah.
They were always opposite, and we've never really got it right with Phil because he couldn't hear the other part. I always had to kind of fill in, and you know, because he couldn't hear, like, you had to like totally change roles, and he just had the hardest time with that.
Wow.
Which is really weird because he's an amazing player, but
He really is.
That one thing just really throws him.
Well, I find, you know, there's a, you know, without a reference point of one, there's all kinds of rhythmic and musical blind spots that everybody has. You could start jamming on something, and then you watch Frank's foot, and you go, oh man, he's hearing it there. Or Warren, I used to do this, and
completely new tempo.
Yeah, exactly. But there was a vibe after you got used to Frank's. Because it was such a personal approach to these things, you did become familiar, and it didn't get like harder, it was just more of it, right? But you were familiar with all the little sort of components, and he would always talk about everybody's pattern recognition, and that's what you had to have. And from working with him, you'd get very astute at picking up these little patterns. And so he would take a lick and string it together, and before you know it, you got some odd thing, and then you do that for so many, and then you'd go to this, but always after this weird thing was one, and there was this sort of
You're right.
a kind of a concept
and that could be
how he worked,
as well. Often with lyrics, rhythmic odd times would be because of the
Well,
lyric.
when I came in, like Guacamole Queen, this kind of thing, I said, is that how you come up with this stuff rhythmically? Do you like conversationally try and fit music to patterns of speech? And he said, sometimes, but he goes, more often than not, it's musical, and then we fit the lyrics in, And, but yeah, he definitely had a honed-in style that once you kind of got the key to, it just seemed second nature. If you worked with him long enough and were in there, you knew how he thought and how, from that angle.
But Terry, now you understand, for instance, with the example Guacamole Queen, that Frank didn't necessarily come up with all those lyrics, that it came out of the folklore, as it's called, stuff from the band, that Duke may have just thrown something out. And then,
of course, every night, and if something stuck, if he liked it, if he cracked up, that was in,
Right.
Yeah, he was more or less like an executive producer in that respect,
Yes,
where,
or a referee.
he wouldn't fund it, he wouldn't fund it if it wasn't happening,
Yes.
but if he liked it, it stayed in his music, so he made the executive decision.
I'm curious to know if you
Punky's
guys...
Whips, there's so much stuff I just made up off the cuff to try and crack him up. Patrick O'Hearn, there's reams of stuff, that's all him. Just,
Do you guys happen to remember how he came about, how it came about that you can't do that? No. Don't you ever watch that thing?
Oh, yeah.
With the rests?
Yes.
Do you remember? I remember the day that happened, because that's not how the piece was written.
No,
I've
that's
heard
right.
this. Tell us.
Dun, dun,
Yeah.
right?
But
da-da-da-dum.
Yeah.
That
but
one.
originally,
There were 5 beats
Yeah, 5
of
beats in
silence.
between
Yeah,
each
5
thing,
beats,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, but it wasn't always that way.
No,
No.
So how did it?
You don't remember that?
Do you remember?
No, all I remember is that there was a manic moment where we were all having fun, which happened a lot. It wasn't just, a job. And someone got the idea. I thought it was you, Ralph. Like, oh, hey, let's just not do anything there. And then, oh, yeah, let's try that. And Frank was doing his, with the mouth open.
Right.
Like that.
leg,
And it just
yeah.
stuck.
Yeah.
And it was hard. It was hard to play that. But I actually remember that day. I remember where I was standing and how you looked and all of that. And I thought, this is amazing. And it just stays like that.
Well, there was one more thing that got added onto it. Since we had the silence, and there was time for me to stand up
Yes.
and do kind of like
Yeah,
a
yeah,
hairdo
yeah,
thing
yeah.
for those
That's
5
right,
beats,
that's
sit
right.
back down and play da-da-da-da.
And that is
stand up
not
again.
easy. Oh, my
No,
God.
No, it's not easy.
Right.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, I
You know,
can remember one where he said, I want this to be like folk rock, and he did that.
Yeah.
And so he had told me that the actual drummer for the Byrds couldn't play in time, so I started pulling the time in and out, and he cracked him up, and we didn't do that in the real show, but, just those things you do to get a laugh that are just so much fun.
And then all those endless moments on the road where there's just nothing to do, and Frank would be waiting for some bug to get fixed at the sound check or whatever, and he'd be doodling on guitar.
Yeah.
And I always knew when those doodles were going to wind up being a piece. And remember, da 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 da.
Yeah.
He was playing that thing night after night after night backstage. And I kept thinking, oh, God, please let it lay right on the marimba, because I saw my future coming. And very often stuff on the guitar had absolutely no...
Nothing to do.
Yeah. But although that was a good... And I, this is scary. It's been 30, how many years?
Plus,
34, 35 years. And I still remember saying to you, Ralph, when it goes... give me a second. Hold on, I got to play through the whole damn thing. Oh, when it hit the, saying the notes. That's it. And remember I said to you, I can't believe these guys know that.
Yeah.
I just heard it. So.
Oh, okay. And I said to
played it
you,
live.
are we supposed to do it? Are we supposed to do it in a group of 4, da 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 da, da 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 da, da 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 da, da da da, and then go back to 5, or is it just straight da 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 da? And you were saying, ooh, that's really interesting. And we tried it both ways. Then we asked him, and I think he said, you know, whatever you want to do. And we just eventually settled back into 5. But I remember thinking, da 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 da. Do you remember that?
Well,
I remember this stuff. This stuff haunts my life.
I know. Well, there's something about it where when you listen to the lick, it's a 5 lick, but it's got some other thing going on in it, you know, where the accents are, and it's got we smoothed it out somehow.
Yeah.
And I don't know specifically what we did, but yeah, it was something that we worked out.
Yeah.
And had determined this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah. And you know, there's also one other thing. I don't know if this is funny or not, but I always find it funny in my own personal history, which is the black page. You all know how it is that when you're completely surrounded by the music and having to learn it and wanting to learn it and living it and practicing it all day and rehearsing it all night, that after a while you can't get these melodies or patterns or whatever it is that
try to go to sleep.
Right. And I remember distinctly one day in the supermarket down the street, and I mean I would just sing da dee 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 dee. So I was essentially singing your solo, but with the melody that Frank had written. And to me it was just I could have been singing anything. I mean, it was a tune that was completely familiar to me.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that other people that might hear me singing under my breath wouldn't have known what the hell that is. It just sounds demented. And especially this last part. Terry, you know the part. Bump.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That stuff. And that's the stuff I couldn't get out of my head. And one day I'm in the produce section and I was singing this while I was looking at apples or whatever. Do you know that people, I began to notice, were moving away from me? They actually, and I thought, oh my God, you know, and I realized what it was. It was that I sounded like some lunatic singing this. And when I told it to Frank, because I thought he would be amused, he loved that story.
Yeah.
He loved it. I mean, that I had taken it into my heart and soul and didn't even realize I was singing it.
He summed it up one time for me. He said, like, you know, like his attitude for the audience was like, you know, when they heard this was like, okay, dance to this.
Oh man, that was fun.